Hello, welcome to episode 4. We're going to continue our study of APIs, but this time we're going to add in some fancier input. The API we're going to use in this episode is a relatively famous API called the PokéAPI. This gives you information about characters from the Pokemon universe. So if we were to look at the API endpoints here, you say it's pokeapi.coapi-v2 Pokemon, and then you put in the name of the Pokemon you want, you get some information. You get information about their abilities, base experience, cries, forms, game indices, height, held items, ID, is default location, moves, names, order, past abilities, past type, species, and sprites, which are images of the Pokemon, and so on. So when we hit this API, we're going to be fetching, let's say we're going to fetch their, let's just get their height, their weight, and we'll fetch one of the sprites. We'll probably fetch the maybe front shiny. So for example, Ditto is going to look like that. And we're going to take these images and display them. Okay. So that's what we're going to be doing. So let's get started as usual with react.new. That takes us to Code Sandbox. We can hit save in order to get some stuff done. Let's clear this out right here. Hit save. Everything is forked, and we can rename this to something like our Pokemon Finder or something like that. That's probably a good one. Let's do our usual thing where we go to package.json and we update the name and the description. Maybe this is another API example. Index.html, we can change React app, say, to Pokemon or something like that. Hit save. We don't need index.html or package.json anymore. We're going to do all of our work in app.js. Let's go back to a multi-file, multi-component thing. Let's put in a title component, and let's put in a component where we're going to type in the name of a Pokemon. We'll call that an entry component, and then we'll have a component for info where all of the information is displayed. We could just probably put all this stuff in different files. It might be a good idea. It's a good habit to get into. So let's in src, we'll create info.js, we will create entry.js, and we'll create title.js. Just to go quickly, we'll say export default function title, and title will have what does title take? I mean, it takes in I guess takes in a title, doesn't it? And then we'll just say, let's return everything in an H1. Let's put the title in here. We now have a little title component. For the entry component, we're just, for right now, export default function entry. We'll work on this later, but for right now, let's just return an input element. And for the info, we'll say export default function info, and we'll just return a section that says info goes here. This is just getting us started. And then back in our app, we have our title, our entry, and our info, and we'll just make sure to import all these things. So we will import title from /title, import entry from /entry, import info from. Okay. The title actually needed a title, so we'll just call it like Pokemon or something. Let's make sure to get the accent on there, spell it right. We'll actually find some Pokemons. And you know what, if you want to style up any of these titles right here, you're totally free to do so. A lot of people like to, put in put in styles over here. Like, for example, you can say maybe title style, and it's gonna be an object. You could say background color, purple, color white. Although when you're using JavaScript to put in your styles rather than CSS, it becomes important to like not use dashes like you would in CSS, but rather use camel case, and you make sure to quote things like so. And then you can say in here, you can put your style is your title style. And then we have an error here. It doesn't like there's a comma somewhere that it doesn't expect over here. Oh, these are objects now. This is not CSS. Okay, so now I have Pokemon Finder. You can also add in your padding of, well, 20 pixels can actually just be 20, believe it or not, which is kind of interesting. And you can even set a margin of 0. Now, again, I have these semicolons in there which don't belong there. That's not very good. Actually, I'm going to set the margin top to 0. And you can't do that. You have to do it like this. You have to margin top. Okay, now the styles on the body are not part of any component. So that's where you might go into styles.css and probably set your body styles of a margin 0 and a padding of 0. And now we are in CSS, so now we get to use this other syntax. So this is something you might want to try. Okay, so we have our title. We have this info. We're not ready to do anything in info. What we will be doing in info is we'll be displaying the image and the information about the Pokemon that we were interested in. And if you remember from previous videos, the way that we get data into a display-oriented component is to pass it in as a prop. So we will be passing in some kind of data here and displaying it like this. So when we go into our app, we want to remember to pass in the data in some sort of a field here, and that data is going to come from a state variable. So we can make some space over here, const data, set data. This is all stuff from last videos. Use state, the data is originally empty, and if we're using use state, we have to import use state from React. This stuff gets easier the more you do it. All right, so we have a way to get some data. And by the way, if we wanted to, before we actually deal with the API, if we want to, sometimes before you actually, spend time on your network calls, sometimes you just want to try out your app before you actually hit an API. And we know that we want to take a look at fields like see, I think we had height, weight, and things like that. So, okay, so here's name. Here's name. So name is something that we would like to use. So let's just say that I'm just going to hard code right now. Name is ditto. And let's see, the weight is 40 and the height is 3. So I'm just going to hard code that in right now just for fun. So let's just say height is 3, weight is 40, and we had a field called front shiny. I'm just going to hard code in for right now whatever we got back inside of our sprites. So sprites had a front shiny of this value right here. Oh, it's actually inside of sprites. So what the API is really returning is something that has a field called sprites. And inside of sprites, we had a front shiny field, which was this. Okay. So why doesn't that look right? Okay, it's a little unhappy. Doesn't like these extra quotes, and now it's pretty happy. Okay, so this is what the things normally should look like when we get them back from the API. But what we're doing right now is we're just hard coding in an API response before we actually have to hit the network, because we'd like to test the info field first. Okay, So inside of info, if we have data inside of info, then what should we do? Well, so I'm going to write the code like this. Okay. If we have data, then we want to show something, right? Otherwise, we want to maybe put in like an empty paragraph saying that we don't have any data yet. Maybe we can say something like no data yet, right? But if we do have data, then we would like to somehow or other display it. So let's put in like a little section over here. And inside the section, we'll start first with a paragraph saying something like meet data.name, because remember, the name field is one thing that we have. And then maybe we can say over here another paragraph, weight is, and then since weight, data.weight, right? Data.weight. Let's close paragraph here. And now we have the height, right? So height is data.height. Close that. Okay. And we do close the section saying no data yet. Really doesn't like this. I wonder why it doesn't like that. Oh, because actually I have no idea why it doesn't like that. What is going on here? Section, meet data.name. Info.js line 3, 9 requires a comma 9. I have to figure out what that is. I think it's just unhappy that it doesn't have a closing quote over here. Oh, and then still not right. What the heck is going on here? Yeah, okay, I got it. It's pretty lame. These should be parentheses. These actually aren't objects. Who knows what I was thinking? Okay, anyway, it says meet ditto. The weight is 40. The height is 3. We can probably put this in an H2, might look a little bit better because there's a little bit more of a heading here. So the idea here is going to be that we want to type in the name of a Pokemon like Pikachu or Ditto or Charizard and hit enter and then have all this stuff updated. There's one other thing we wanted to put in here though, and that was the actual image. So let's get a figure in here with img src equals, and it was data sprites front shiny. Almost forgot that one. And alt should be, well, alt can just be the name of the Pokemon. And I think we can just close off our image like so, figure img, and then that's our src like so, and then close figure like so. We get it right. Always making mistakes with stuff like this. What are you going to do? I mean, I guess the alternative was to actually pre-record the video or practice recording the videos, but who wants to bother? Okay, there you go. So there's Ditto. So what we need to do right now is make sure that as we type in new values here, the values that we type in will actually hit the API and put the information in like so, rather than just having it all hard-coded. Because, I mean, hard coding is nice, but it's not very usable. So useState is going to start off as empty. And let's make sure when it's empty that we don't really have we do have problems over here, because when we don't have any information over here, we're going to get some errors. So it's good that we tested that. Let's make sure that we only do this if we have a data, if data.sprites exist. Then we can say no data yet. Really, we should say, we should do better. We should do better than that, right? But I think for right now, it's okay. For example, like if we don't have data, you should probably do this kind of stuff. We should probably do a little bit more. But I think right now we're kind of okay. Because we don't have, I mean, really, it should be data.name. If you have data.name, and you have data.sprites, and you have a weight, and you have a height, and you have data.sprites, then you can get this information. And that's actually a bit better. Okay. The hard part now, let's do the hard part, and that is to type in some content right here and make sure that when you type in this content, you're going to change the name of the Pokemon that you're trying to fetch. So we're going to need a variable called name. And we'll say use state, and currently the name is empty. All right. And then we need in our entry component, we're going to want that whenever we type something in here to the entry component and hit enter, we want it to update this value here. So let's make it, let's say action equals set name. All right. So now let's actually build up our entry component. Right now, our entry component is simply an input field. Let's put this in a form so that the thing about an HTML form is whenever the form is submitted, something gets to happen. And we can actually say what we want to have happen like so, right? So this means we have an input field in here and we hit enter, it's going to call the submit function. So function submit, and then it's going to do something. Now, the first thing that to know about submit is submit takes in a JavaScript event, which we can call E. And normally when you submit forms, JavaScript always wants to reload the page. I should say the browser always wants to reload the page. But if we don't want that to happen, we should just say here, prevent default, so that the form doesn't resubmit. So you type something and you hit enter, the page is not refreshed. Without prevent default, if I type something and hit enter, you can see that the page was refreshed, and that's certainly not what we want. Now, now remember back over here in app, we passed in an action for something that we wanted to do. We wanted to call set name. So back in our entry field, let's make sure that action is a parameter and that action is fired off here as well. So what is it though that we want to set the name to? We want to set the name in action to whatever was in this input field. And you may think that you could do something like document.query selector and get the input and try to find the dot value field and take it in like that. But that's not usually what's done in React. In React, what we usually like to do is what's called tracking our input components. We want to connect the values of the input component to a state variable. And the state variable is often called content. So let's do content, set content. And at the beginning, this is just the empty string. Okay, and what we'll do over here is let's remember to import use state from React. Okay, and so now then we're going to, the way you track an input field is you say, well, my value is going to be the value of the content state variable. And whenever a change is made, okay, our job here is to invoke a function that takes in an event. And the event is going to tell us, remember we have e.target.value. That's the name we want to do. We want to take this data right here, whatever we put in here, and then we're going to set our tracked content value, our content variable. So this thing right here is going to be tracked like so. In other words, so when we're done, I think what we'd like to do is every time I hit enter here, it's usually a good idea to erase the field that you typed in there. That's kind of nice because this way I can type something and hit enter and now it's clear. Every time I hit enter, things are clear. Now, since we set this thing up this way, every time we submit the form by pressing enter, we're going to invoke submit, which means we don't refresh the page, but we want this action to be passed in, which is called set name. We want to actually pass content to it because we want to set the name of the Pokemon in app, this thing right here, to the name that we typed in the entry field. We're saying entry action equals set name, right? So that means that set name is going to be called on content, and content is whatever is typed in here because of the way we tracked it. And now that all that stuff is done, okay, now we have our entry field here, we can go back into app, and inside of app, we can just write some code to go hit the API. And then what I'm going to do, just to save time, because this video is getting long, is going to paste the code in here. And you can see what this code's supposed to do. You can see an error that we don't have use effect. So let me add use effect here, hit save, we're good to go. Now what's happening here is that we're going to go to pokeapi.co/api/v2/Pokemon, and then the name of the Pokemon that we typed in. That's going to come from where? Okay. Well, I actually said Pokemon here, but that's not actually right. It actually name, because it has to be this value right here. So we hit this URL, we get JSON, and then we set the data. You can do it like this, or you can do it like that. That's totally fine. If you fail to fetch the data, we're going to show an error, like if you get something bad. Okay, so what's use effect? Use effect is it's part of React. It's technically known as a hook because its name starts with use. But use effect is a function which will be fired whenever any one of these variables here change. What we're saying is, if the name field ever changes, sorry, the name state variable, if name ever changes, then you are going to invoke this function right here. That's the function you're going to do. And how does name change? Name changes because we set name into our entry field. I mean, that's how it's done. Okay. I mean, we could test it out, right? Pikachu. There's me, Pikachu. Here's Charizard. That all seems to work. Mew is a short name that we typed in. If you type in garbage, it just says no data yet. We can clean up the errors and say if there was an error, we have data, we could have just said no such Pokemon exists, but we're not going to do that right now. The last thing I'll end with for this video is to say, what about encode URI component? Well, to be nice, every time that you send data to another server, if you ever try to manufacture URL and you are using data that people are typing in, you got to watch out for people that are typing in really nasty characters that try to mess up the stuff that you try to display or the stuff that you try to send. And if you're going to take data that people type in, like Mew or whatever, I mean, you don't want them to type in things like script alert 1 or anything like that. These are bad things to type in. Or things with maybe semicolons or even ampersands, like passing in an ampersand would pass in additional parameters here. All that stuff can really mess up the network communication. So it's important that before you put stuff into a URL that you're going to be using, just make sure to do encode URI component. I will leave it to you to look up encode URI component in whatever documentation you like going to for JavaScript. Okay, I kind of muddled through that one with lots of mistakes, but mistakes are actually part of programming, so I'm going to leave them in this video. I'll see you in episode 5.